Well, there are fresh calls to change roadside drug testing rules in New South Wales, in particular for those people using medicinal cannabis. Now, this is a big issue because right now it is illegal to have any amount of cannabis in your system when you're behind the wheel, even if it's been prescribed by a doctor. If it's your first offence, it's a $600 fine and a licence suspension for 3 months. That's the penalty even if you're using cannabis oil for cancer, arthritis, or a whole range of other things. Police only test if cannabis is in your system. They don't test whether it's impacting your driving. So we want to make this clear. We're not talking about a random person smoking a joint. We're talking about people who use cannabis to help relieve pain from terminal and chronic conditions. And when you think about it, you can drink alcohol and drive if you're under the limit. You can be drugged up on morphine, endone, antidepressants, if you can prove that it's for medical purposes. But if you're using any amount of medicinal cannabis, you can be done. A new bill will be introduced in the New South Wales Parliament today to try to change that. And it's Jeremy Buckingham from the New South Wales Legalise Cannabis Party who's going to be doing so, and he joins me live in the studio. Jeremy Buckingham, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ben.
Is that a fair summary of where you are coming from? Well, what do you want to do exactly? What do you want the rules to be?
What we want is to have medicinal cannabis treated like all other legal medicines, so that if a person is taking their medicinal cannabis in accordance with their prescription that's been prescribed by a doctor who's given them advice about how to take that cannabis, if they're taking that medicinal cannabis in accordance with their prescription and they're not impaired, that they should be free from prosecution if they test positive in RDT, a roadside drug test. They can go to court, they can present their prescription, and they don't cop the fine, they don't lose their licence. Because, Ben, people are choosing to go back onto much stronger medications. They're choosing their life or their lifeline, which is their car. They're making a terrible decision.
Okay, New South Wales Police says, and I quote, cannabis slows down your reaction time and reduces your ability to respond to situations. It also changes your perception of distance and time, lowers your concentration, reduces coordination, and makes you drowsy.
That is absolutely true. Those things can happen, but a doctor will say to someone, if they're going on to medicinal cannabis, don't drive for 2 weeks until your body's used to it. And then when you do take your medicinal cannabis, either don't drive for 4 or 5 hours or don't drive for 8 hours. And we do not think we should undermine our road safety rules. The impairment test should stay. So if a police officer sees someone driving erratically, they're incoherent, they've got red eyes, they've got slurred speech, they should still be fined with impairment. So the impairment test, that offence still remains. This is for people who are taking their medicine, are unimpaired, so that they can continue to live their lives.
Okay, you know that there are a lot of people who want to use cannabis for recreational reasons as opposed to medicinal reasons. So won't you therefore see an explosion in the number of people who are going off to a doctor saying, I've got an issue, I've got a health problem, I need a script?
Well, that's up to the doctors. Doctors will say to people, do you have a legitimate reason? Why are you presenting to me? And that's up to the doctors. The doctors will look at someone and say, do you really have a chronic illness? Do you have Parkinson's, cancer, epilepsy, these types of things, and make the decision based on that. So that's where the medicinal cannabis regime, the integrity of it comes into play. I've got faith in the TGA and our doctors to make sure that they do a good job, but we need to make sure that people who do legitimately have a reason to have medicinal cannabis can drive, because there are hundreds of thousands of people in New South Wales, millions of people across Australia will be soon on this cannabis because it's having a big impact on some of our chronic diseases. It has to be dealt with, Ben.
Jeremy Buckingham is our guest in the studio from the New South Wales Legalise Cannabis Party. I've spoken to Lucy Haslam about this many times because her son was a real poster boy for this movement because he was chronically ill, and then she discovered the cannabis oil and it made such a difference. And we've heard that. Once upon a time when you talk about this issue, people would suggest, we're talking about, people up in Nimbin or Byron Bay or whatever who just want to smoke cones or get high. Now you hear from mums and dads and grandmas and grandpas about their children and grandchildren, the pain people have gone through and the relief that this offers.
Absolutely. We hear from people all the time, people who are suffering. Like there's a woman who's talked to me. She's got 3 kids, single mum. She's got MS, and she's choosing between her medicine, which is saving her life, or her licence, which is her lifeline. The average user for medicinal cannabis in Australia is a woman in her 50s or 60s. So these aren't potheads, these aren't coneheads, these are people who are taking a legal medicine legitimately and just trying to go about their lives. And so we're calling on the Minns Labor government to back these reforms. Daniel Andrews looks like he's going to back these reforms in Victoria. It's a sensible, modest reform. We want to work with the police to protect the integrity of our road safety system. We think we can manage both things.
The current system falls over when you consider that someone can be pulled over by someone in a position of authority and they can be busted for having cannabis in their system, even though they've had another person in a position of authority, a GP, give them a prescription for that drug. That just doesn't make sense.
It absolutely does not make sense. It's not how we deal with any other legal medicine, and that's what my bill would do. It just makes sure that any other legal medicine, we have the same clause in the Act for morphine. So if you test positive for morphine, you've got a prescription, you're free from prosecution. We are just doing exactly the same thing. And the police recognise the system's broken. Lots of the roadside drug tests either give back a false positive or false negative. We want to make sure we can protect the integrity of the road safety system. This is the rules that they have in Germany, England and Tasmania right now. We think we can introduce this safely.
How long does the cannabis remain in your system? Say someone has got cancer or epilepsy or arthritis and they're using the cannabis oil or the vaporizer or whatever else they're using. How long does it hang in the system? So when could you get busted?
Well, this is the key point, because the test is for presence. It's not for impairment. It's not like a roadside blood test, which tests for 0.05. It just tests for any level of it. You can have a drop of cannabis. Some of it, of the cannabinoids you can have, don't have any psychoactive ingredient in it. You can have a drop of that under your tongue, and it can stay in your system for days or weeks, and so that you can be pinged at an RDT days after you've had your medicine when you are clearly not impaired. That is a broken system. I think the government recognises that it needs to be reformed, and we're calling on them to support my bill.
I mentioned that police are saying cannabis slows down your reaction time, it reduces your ability to respond to situations, but, and this is where it falls apart, you can be full to the eyeballs on morphine, endone, antidepressants, all sorts of other prescribed drugs, and you can keep on driving.
That's exactly right, Ben. There's no test there for endone. And see, what happens is if people can't take their cannabis, which is a relatively mild medicine, they look for the alternatives. So they go to endones, they go to benzodiazepines, other opiates, and they can have a really detrimental impact on your capacity to drive and also on your psychology. They can cause a lot of other. We want an opioid epidemic in Australia, and that's why people are looking at cannabis as a legitimate alternative for their medicine, for pain relief, insomnia, anxiety, these types of things.
Okay, so this bill's going to be introduced to New South Wales Parliament today. How do you expect it to go?
Well, I expect it to be passed. I think the Minns government's got to look at the evidence. We've got scientists, we've got researchers, we've got police recognising, the community recognising the system's broken. So we're calling on the Minns government to pass the bill, and if not, then to look at a trial of a cohort of medicinal cannabis patients, put them on the road, give them their prescription, give them the advice from the doctor, and see how they go over a year. Couple thousand driving, let's see how they operate, and we believe we can have a safe system in terms of road safety and people taking their medicine responsibly.
Once upon a time we had an impairment test, didn't we, where someone would have to walk along a straight line?
Well, we still do, Ben.
We do?
We still do, and we think that should stay. There's an offence for impairment, and there's a field sobriety test. We think those things should stay. If you take your medicinal cannabis and you're impaired, you shouldn't be on the road.
Okay.
And you should still be pinged there. So we think that road safety is fundamental. That's the first principle, but also making sure that people who've taken illegal medicine responsibly should be able to drive.
Thank you for coming to the studio.
Thanks, Ben.
To listen to the full show, listen live weekdays from 5:30 to 9 a.m. on 2GB.com.